Thank you.
Welcome everyone to the Rotary Club of Cultural Exchange Enthusiasts. There's John's contact information. He is our fearless leader. We are a small, cute little club, and we intend to grow. We would like to have 25 members by the end of this year. Our dues are $270 a year. And if anyone is interested, if you have friends that just think that this, I don't know, just really interests them and they are internationally minded the way we all are, we would love to have them as part of our group. You can get in touch with me, with John, with anyone on the screen actually. Also for current Rotarians, we have a category called Friend of the Club with $100 support. You can have access to every meeting and unlimited makeup slips. I would like to just remind all of us that we will have a service project this year. It's not going to be youth exchange oriented because the youth exchange program, unfortunately from RI, is on hold for a year. But our project is going to be the butterfly pollinator project. Lindy, I believe you are spearheading this, and now that tax season is slowing down for you, I understand there's going to be a planning meeting very soon. So we are all looking forward to learning more about this project and how we can help. Next week, we have Mark Berger. He is a Rotarian, and he took a GSE team to Australia some years ago. And my understanding is after that GSE trip, they traveled around Australia. And so he's going to be talking about that extra trip that they went on. We also have some really interesting people coming up to speak. Espen is going to speak. Remind me, John or Greg, where did Espen go?
Espen went to the Faroe Islands.
Oh, good. Another Faroe. Okay, perfect. He's going to speak the week after Mark.
I take it back. His brother went to the Faroe Islands. He went to Sweden. What am I saying? He went to Sweden. He was in the eastern suburb of Stockholm.
Okay, great. Then after that, we've got Julia Cronin, who is a friend of Rihanna. And she is a linguist, and she's going to talk to us about languages. And she asked me the makeup of our club and what languages we speak and where we went on exchange. So I'm really curious to know what she's going to do with that information. And then every other month, we're going to be having a club meeting / happy hour. And our next one is May 19th. So you can look forward to that. So without further ado, I am really excited to have McKinzie with us today. As a few of you have mentioned, the McVey family is really a lucky family when it comes to North Star Rotary Youth Exchange. I mean, there have been many generations involved in Rotary and the Youth Exchange program, and we're really thrilled, McKinzie, to have you with us. So I'm going to let you take it away. I'm going to stop sharing this screen. And I think you want to share something, right?
I do. Let me share. Let me grab it up here. Do a presentation first. 1 second here. All right, first I am actually going to start by sharing the wine that I've chosen today, which is actually a bubbly. Hold on, and let me get this slideshow going so I can share my screen. It's been a minute since I've used. I can share my screen, right? Yeah, share screen. Here we go. Okay. Okay, we're going to do. I just want the from the beginning. Here we go. Okay, first though, I would like to. All right, so I've chosen a bubbly for today from one of my favorite wineries. I think they make the best sparkling in Argentina. Argentina mostly is known for its reds, but whites are slowly starting to come up onto the scene. And have any of you, just a show of hands, have any of you ever savored a wine before? Opened it with a knife, basically? No one? Okay, well, I'm gonna show you guys how it's done because it's really fun and it's not too dangerous, which is why I've chosen outside. So you just take off the bottle cap, this part. I once did this in Ree's house, which is not a great idea. I wouldn't recommend doing it outside. But this is like, essentially you take any sort of kitchen knife and you're gonna hit this rim here, and it's basically a 1, 2, 3 motion. And there.
Wow.
God, you're lovely. That's at your next gathering.
Oh my
Now
gosh,
all of
that's
you
awesome.
can show that next party trick. So don't say I didn't teach you anything. So I've been living in Mendoza for 3 years now. And when I first got here, I started working at a French winery, which is really like, thank you, Rotary, because the French really tied in with my job prospects. So Mendoza is the top winemaking region in Argentina, and there is a big French influence, which I'll talk about a little bit later. So today I'm mostly going to be talking, this is actually a presentation that we would give to our wine reps that would come over that represent our wine. For example, there was an Irish and Scottish group that came over, and so I got to interpret for that group. And this is a presentation that we gave them. So it's basically just to kind of tell you a little bit more about the region, what the main grape varieties are, and a little bit of the history for here in Mendoza. Some of this gets a little bit technical. Don't worry about that. There's a lot of information on the screen for some of the slides. I'll just go over like the main, most important parts. Can everyone see the screen all right? The presentation? Okay, great. So there's 3 main regions for wine producers or 3 main wine producing regions in Argentina. The north, Cuyo, which is the middle, which is where Mendoza is part of, and then in the south in Patagonia. And actually tasted it. That's pretty good. Yeah. So wine history, essentially, I think the most important facts here are the today facts, that it's the world's 5th largest producer. Now the 7th exporter, because for a long time, Argentina was producing wine, but they were keeping it for themselves. And really in the 90s, they started exporting. Here it says more than 1,000 wineries. It's actually more like closer to 3,000 wineries. Wow. The 9th in cultivated surface, and the 8th largest in consumer per capita, which has actually gone down a lot back in the 90s as well, before the big exportation happened. They were drinking about 90 liters per person per year. And that number has gone down a lot. It's closer to 20 liters per person per year now. And that's because the quality has gotten a lot better, because before it's just quantity and now it's a lot less, but it actually went up last year thanks to quarantine. So there are some good things about quarantine. Here's just the breakdown of essentially where the biggest producers are. The pink is Mendoza. After that is San Juan, which is still part of the Cuyo, still part of the middle area in Argentina. And then it's just like a breakdown of the south and the north. I'll get into a few differences. If you didn't know, Malbec is the big variety that is produced in Argentina. The likelihood, if you get an Argentine wine, it's 70% probably going to be Malbec. Some of the other big varieties are Cabernet Sauvignon. There also is a big, I think Cabernet Franc is also going to be the next big popular grape from Argentina, but yeah, coming soon. And then for white varietals, there's a lot of Chardonnay. And then there's actually one varietal called Torrontés. I don't know if anyone's had a Torrontés before. It's sort of a sweet, it's not a sweet wine, but it's very floral. It's very interesting. And it's one that's only produced in Argentina. So a little bit of history. So the important thing, I think, is that, so the Frenchman, Michel Pouget, was commissioned by the Argentine government to bring over basically Malbec and a bunch of different varieties, but it's actually Malbec that ended up being successful in 1853. And there's now actually better Malbec in Argentina because there's 22 different recognized clones, whereas in France, there's only a few different varieties. And they only really add it for mixing in typically the Bordeaux region. So it's not really used as much in France, and here it's a really big deal. And there's reason for that, is because it is really good. Compared to Malbecs that I've tried from other regions, they do a really great job. This is where it gets a little bit technical. There is a difference between Côte and Malbec, which at the winery where I was working, our finest wine that we would sell was 50-50. And the biggest difference is that Côte has a thicker skin, which the thicker the skin, the more tannic the wine is going to be. And tannins are basically from the seeds in the skin, and they're a way of preserving the wine, but they also dry your mouth out. So it's that sensation. Yeah, basically when the wine dries your mouth out, it's because it's pretty tannic. And it's usually just reds that have tannins, because whites get the grape skins pulled off at the beginning, so they don't have tannins. There's tannins in food too. So like in nuts and dark chocolate and black tea, like that, all of those things have tannins in them. So where is the Uco Valley? Okay, so this is Mendoza. This map I don't like as much as this next one. So on the left is all of Mendoza, and it shows you Uco Valley is basically in the middle. It's south of the city of Mendoza, because there's the region and the city. And so in Uco Valley, there's 3 different regions. And I worked in Tunuyán, in the area called Los Chacayes, in the middle there. Which actually, the French, and actually there's a lot of international investment in Uco Valley since the 90s. It's the newest region, basically, well, not the newest, but it's not as old as some of the vineyards closer to the city. And it's because a lot of the French and American and Italian and Spanish winemakers have come over. And basically there's a lot of rich people that have their wineries here in Mendoza, and they come on vacation whenever they want. So it is a really nice vacation area. But this area is very international. There's only, I think, 1 or 2 Argentine wineries in Uco Valley. So the region here, high elevations, about 3,000 to 4,500 feet. It's very dry here, so without irrigation, there would be no winery, there'd be no vineyards. So the arid conditions, and it's nice for sleeping because it's warm. You can eat outside all year long, and it's cool in the evening for sleeping, which is really great. This is specific to the winery where I was working. No, sorry. All of Uco Valley has about 27,000 hectares, mostly red, 85%, and Malbec, especially 46%. So the 3 main parts that I'm going over are the altitude, the dry climate, and the low fertility soils, which are the 3 stress factors that influence the plant, which then produce, of course, the grapes for the wine. And so what a lot of people don't understand is that it's a lot of preparation to start a winery. So all of these foreign wineries in Uco Valley, that bought land in the 90s that was basically virgin land, and the land is full of like cacti and very like mountain plants and a lot of rocks. And so it's about 1 to 2 years just to prepare the land to be able to plant, because you have to take all the rocks out. You have to, some people burn the soil to make it more fertile, and then you do the plantings, and you can't start harvesting the fruit until the plant is about 5 years old. 3 if you really want to risk it. So there's already about 7 years of investing before you can even start to make, and that's only to start making the wine. And then usually if it's a red wine, it's a 2 to 3 year process to make that wine. So from very start to market, it might take 10 years for you to make a red wine. So in the meantime, a lot of wineries do purchase grapes from other regions, but it's a big process. So Tunuyán in the middle is basically It's at the foothills of the Andes Mountains here. So it's not the highest elevation, but it's not like the city levels, which are about 900 meters. And just to compare, I guess, to different regions in Argentina, Salta, which is in the north, has the highest elevation than Mendoza, and then it's slowly, like in the south in Patagonia, they have the least elevation. And so how does this influence the wine? So it makes, there's a diurnal shift, which means that it gets hot during the day and cold at night. And so this actually, because there's so many days of sun here, there's a lot of sugar produced in the grape, and the sugar is what ends up getting converted into alcohol. And so because there's such like high sugar grapes, the wines also tend to be very alcoholic. Even the whites here tend to be about 13% alcohol. And then so there are also, there's also thicker grape skins that form because of the cold. And there's also a technique actually that it was interesting. The winery, when I first got there, they had all of the stones that they had originally taken out of the earth, basically like along the line of, like along the base of the vine, because the stones would get warm during the day and then keep the vineyard warm at night too. But then when I was there, because they decided to go organic, they actually had to take all the stones out because they couldn't get the weed whackers to go through. So a very labor intensive process. The dry climate is very, very dry here. So just a comparison with other regions in the world, Mendoza is way drier than even Napa or, you know, parts of France and Australia. So yeah, without irrigation, the vineyards would not be possible, which does bring in a sustainability question that is being somewhat addressed here, but I think it'll definitely be an issue in the future because every year there's a little bit less water. The low fertility soils. So this is actually, so in Tunujan, there is in Tupungato, actually a little bit north, so about 20 kilometers away from the winery where I was working, there's a volcano. And so it's not active, but there is a lot of volcanic rock in the soil and very alluvial soils. So the water just goes right through them. And so the vineyard or the vine has to actually like make really deep roots, like over a yard deep to get to the water. But that does make it a little bit stable because there's also wind, a seasonal wind that comes down from the mountain, and that can also be pretty destructive. The wind is good because it takes care of the insect problem, but it can also like bring up a lot of debris. And the biggest issue too is hailstorms, because sometimes you have a beautiful crop, but if you haven't put the netting up, which the netting is very expensive, you can, you know, it's a gamble, and you might lose everything, which could affect your harvest for the next 2 or 3 years as well. So before doing any planting, they always basically dig a big hole to find out like what is the soil composition, what are the rocks, like what are the varieties that we should be planting here in this microclimate. Here are some of the rocks. I'm not a rock expert. I don't even really, I mean, granite, I know how to pronounce, but the other one, to be honest, I don't know how to pronounce. But this is part of the winery. This is a section where they were going to be planting some new acres, and they just needed to know like what's going on under the ground. And so this is also where they kept the bodies. No, I'm just kidding. The foothills and Los Chacais, lots of limestone, which limestone is also in the Champagne region in France, very important for a lot of vineyards. And then the other important thing that I wanted to say, if you do come here for vacation, there's 2 wineries that have Minnesota connections. One is Piatelli, and the other is I just forgot their name. It starts with an M. And they were actually one of the first people that helped me when I first got here, and I'm not remembering their name now, but McKinzie. Those are 2 wines that I've seen in in wine stores in Minnesota, that if you do want to.
Are they Minnesotans who moved to Argentina?
So Piatelli is actually, the owners are Minnesotan, but they, as far as I know, they don't live in Argentina. They own 2 wineries, one in the north in Salta and one in Mendoza. And actually in Salta, they have been doing some groundbreaking work because they're the biggest winery there, and they've been doing a lot of experimental like growing and just different stuff like that. And for the McKinnies, they actually live in Minnesota, which is how they're able to finance. Like, so one brother lives in Minnesota and one brother lives here and runs the winery, and the other brother basically like sends money. So wow. Yeah. That's it for the technical part. Any questions about like the region or here or wine or anything like that? I know it's sort of a quick overview, but it's a really beautiful region. Basically here, the typical, if you go on a wine tour, typically it's a little tour of the facilities, which the great thing about here is that you don't have to sign a waiver for anything, and you really get to be like in with the winemakers, especially if you go to a smaller winery. Like you get to try from the barrels, which, you know, as far as I've heard, for a lot of American places, that's not the case because it's a huge liability for contamination and other issues. But the cool thing here is that you really get to participate, and if you want to come and harvest as well, there's, you know, free labor is always welcome. But it's a really beautiful region, and I would highly recommend coming. So yeah.
Great, McKinzie. Everyone just unmute yourselves if you'd like to ask McKinzie a question. Elka, you might just want to do your little show and tell one more time, because I don't know if McKinzie had a chance to see it.
Sorry, we just went to the store and like tried to find an Argentinian wine, so we actually got the Piatelli.
Oh, great.
It's really good. Mm-hmm. So highly recommend it. And here we are in the background, like plotting a trip to Argentina.
Yeah, really.
Our last big international trip was to Jordan, and there wasn't as much alcohol on that trip. So I think we need to make up for it. But actually, I was curious if you could share a little bit about your wine story. So you went to France, but then last week, it was briefly mentioned that you got like a wine certificate from St. Paul College or something, or like what drew you to Argentina?
Yeah.
So feel free to go in depth as much as you'd like, but I'm just super curious of like how you ended up where you are and where my life went wrong, where I'm not where you are right now.
Instead, she's with me.
Yeah, instead I'm like writing out the pandemic with my dad, you know, so.
It's not a bad thing. You guys seem well prepared.
He's a pretty good roommate.
So basically, so I learned to like wine in France, in Burgundy, because I don't come from a wine, like wine in my family is very much Christmas and Easter. And so I was studying at the University of Minnesota and international relations or global studies, which at the University of Minnesota, you can study wine, but because it's a dry campus there, you wouldn't be able to taste anything. And so Ree had actually done a program at the St. Paul College, which they have the culinary school there, and they also offer a wine certificate program. And so essentially there's different ways to get certified in the wine industry. There's basically 2 or 3 different bodies. That certify, and one of them is the Sommelier Guild, basically. And so the course covers the first 2 levels of becoming. And the advantage that they have is that it's based, so they cover marketing, which a lot of people don't cover marketing, and they also cover food and wine pairing, which for some reason, like that, you know, wine has always been thought of with food, but we tend to isolate it. And I actually really lucked out because there were 2 chefs in the class that I enrolled in like at the same time, and they would cook for us every week. So that was amazing. So I highly recommend that program. And there was everyone from like industry experts that have been, you know, working in the industry for 20 years and just kind of wanted to see if this would be a good course for their future employees, all the way to people that were just like, I like wine and I just want to keep buying, you know, better wines, basically. And so from there, I worked at a wine shop in the North Loop, and I was also a tour guide, because we do have wineries in Minnesota. That's also, you know, there's wine in all 50 states. I don't know if you knew that, but yeah, I would take groups on tours to some of the wineries in Wisconsin and Minnesota. And I did want to work at a winery, and my teacher, Nikki, basically told me that I could stay in Minnesota, but that I would learn bad habits. And so I chose to return. During college, I did an exchange year in Argentina, which is in Mendoza, which is actually why I decided to come back here, is because I was torn between France and Argentina, and France is a lot more complicated with the visa, and also just to like go and try and find a job. I was like, I don't know how well this is going to go. So I did decide to come back to Argentina, where they're a lot more flexible, and it worked out well. Yeah, so I got a job at the French winery, and I worked there for about 1.5 years, and then I worked with 3 little wineries, pretty much all in tourism, and then a little bit on the commercial side as well. So. Yeah.
How long was the program at St. Paul College?
It's a semester, so it's every Saturday for 5 hours.
That's not bad.
No,
I was
it's
thinking
great.
2 years
it's great.
or something.
Yeah,
Oh,
you
wow.
get up early to go taste wine. I mean,
Oh, yeah, right.
not bad. Yeah. And the good thing too is that for wine learning, I really do encourage it in groups, because wine is expensive. And if you want to try the good stuff, like you really do kind of need to have, you need to try a bottle with, 10 other people. That way you can try a bunch of different stuff, and it's cool. Yeah.
Oh, there's a kitty in your life.
Oh yeah, Dora. Yeah, I see her running around. So yeah.
Are you still?
Any other questions?
Yeah. Are you still at a winery, or you're doing something else now?
So I'm not currently working at a winery. It's been about 1 year since I've been out of the industry. I still have been enjoying it as a tourist. Like I still go to wineries, and I've still been tasting, and I still have my wine contacts, but it basically since the pandemic, the winery where I was working, it was pretty much all foreign owners, and they decided to close everything because a lot of their tourism was foreign, which there is national tourism, but it's not the same. There's not the same budget. And so yeah, they decided to close. And so I've basically just been doing other projects and waiting to see which opportunity sounds the most interesting to get back into it, essentially. So yeah.
So you want to stay in Argentina?
Yeah, that's the idea. The idea is actually to have my base here, and then spend part of my year in the US or in France, or just traveling around. But because basically the quality of life here is really good for the cost, and it's really cheap to maintain the living conditions here, and I could travel. That was the idea before the pandemic hit, and now it's been pretty just Argentina and local travel, but
things will get back. Things will get back to normal.
Yeah.
I was as I mentioned, was exchange student in Mexico, so I'm curious, how do you compare your French at this point with your Spanish?
It saddens me to say it, but I think my Spanish is better than my French at this point. But that's just because I haven't been immersed in French I still talk with some of my French friends, and I still exchange a few emails with people, but lately when I was working at the French winery, that helped a lot. But yeah, I just haven't been using it as much. So
yeah, no, I'd expect that from the number of years you've spent there and all the rest. But that's great. I mean, the fact that your Spanish is now on equal footing as your French, even better. I mean, great.
I will say, I still think my written and reading and writing is probably still better in French, but for speaking, I think Spanish at this point. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Does anyone here speak Spanish? Okay.
And okay, you speak French quite well, right? Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. Very cool.
I know there are other questions. Who else has questions for McKinzie?
I will say the other advantage too is that here, a really nice, if you want to splurge on a bottle of wine, $10, $15 is that would be one of the nicest bottles. Yeah.
Wow. And what's an average bottle of wine cost? Just nice, drinkable every night for dinner, nothing special.
In dollars, probably about $2.
Oh, gee.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's just like
so cool.
midline. Like that's not even the cheapest. Like the cheapest is like $1, but there's like I'd say $2 to $5 you can get a really nice wine.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I have a question, but if you cannot answer it, just don't answer it, right? My question, since you mentioned the winery or the vineyards, it was basically all bare land before the 90s or until mid 90s, and cacti and such. And then a few minutes later, you talked about the water rights and such. And I thought, oh, this could be an interesting conversation. So how does the management work with the local organizations, and is there any opposition, and how does that work? And especially in the culture where demonstrations and protests are completely normal. So how does that work?
So it's actually, well, yeah. Last year there was a lot of protests because they had sold some land or rights to land to some of the big oil companies that was potentially going to be like contaminating the water, not here like in Uco Valley, but in regions close by. And yeah, people are very aware because we Mendoza is a desert, and so basically the main water source is from the mountains, and so if we don't get a lot of snow, then there's less water. And a lot of the snow that melts and comes down, it does just go right through the soil, like it doesn't stay on the top. And so a lot of the wineries, just bought such big plots of land that they own the water that passes through there. However, with all of the wine practices, like, I don't know why, like they do talk about it. Like there are a few wineries that, especially like Zuccardi is one of the big wineries that has been doing a lot of also experiments just to see like different water irrigation systems. The most common is drip irrigation. So they run basically hoses all through the winery, and it's just like drip irrigation. The oldest way is they would make little like canals and just flood the vineyard, sorry. That method's like pretty imprecise though. The other thing too, I mean, the biggest consumption is not necessarily the vineyard. The biggest consumption of water is usually in the winery for the winemaking process, because you have to clean everything basically every 12 hours for each shift. You're just like power hosing everything down, and that, like, there's a huge amount of water that gets wasted there. And so the most there is a bit of a movement towards like more natural wines and I don't know if you've heard of biodynamic wines. Biodynamic is controversial to say the least. No, it's basically like a step above organic. It's more of like a holistic view, but it gets in line with like the lunar cycle and there's different levels, but it's a little bit more intense than just going organic, which I think will be tied to the water. I honestly don't know. I don't know what people are gonna do. It's a good, like, it is gonna be a good topic of conversation for the future, especially because like there's been a lot of investment here, and so I'm sure it's on a lot of people's minds. But yeah, it's up till now there's not been a lot of like control from government or from other organizations that have come in and said like, okay, we need to restrict the water use. No, so yeah, we'll see.
Great question.
Thank you.
McKenzie, you mentioned red and white wine, and there's a brand of orange wine that I'm familiar with. Does Argentina make orange wine at all?
I haven't well, see, that's not true. I did come across one orange wine here, but no, it's not very common. Orange wine, for those of you that don't know, is basically white wine made with the red wine process. So basically the grape skins are kept in the fermented process. So that's why it gets its name. It's basically just white wine with tannins. kind of, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of orange wine, but again, it's so rare to try a lot of orange wines that I've only tried a handful. So, yeah.
Sam,
are you a fan?
I was going to say, are you a fan? How are you connected
to orange wine?
Yeah.
I was introduced to it about a year and a half ago. Because one of my friends, they live out in Seattle, and they were saying that orange wine is pretty popular. And so they recommended this brand to me. And so I got it from the store, and it was pretty good.
That's great.
I think it's a fad. What is actually really popular here right now is vermouth, which has been really surprising. Like, I also think that's a fad, but you know, fads sell, so.
Fads sell, that's it. And do you have a question?
Yeah, I was wondering, so what you just said, is vermouth a wine?
Vermouth is basically like a flavored wine. Like, they add different like spices and things to it. And yeah, it's basically like a flavored wine, essentially.
I never knew that.
Yeah, here a couple, like just recently in the past 6 months, there's been 3 vermoutherias that have opened. Oh my God, it's such a like old Italian practice. But Argentina is like, the immigration is Italian and Spanish mostly, and then the French came over in the 90s. So that was actually the big, like the French influence came over in the 90s when they started to export and they weren't having a lot of success. And so a lot of wineries contracted European winemakers to come over and teach them their techniques, because the wine was not very good quality, at least for an international palate. Yeah. So the French influence here is pretty new.
Oh, go ahead, Kristen.
I was going to say, my impression of South America is that the countries compete against one another. Like, I know there's a huge rivalry between Argentina and Brazil when it comes to soccer. So who's the big South American competitor for you in South America? Oops, sorry. Jeez, I have
I would say, I mean, Argentina has problems with all of its neighbors except for Uruguay. Like, for some reason they really like Uruguay, but otherwise, like, there's conflict with everyone. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I would say the biggest rivalry for wine is definitely Chile.
Chile.
For wine is Chile. For soccer, it's definitely Brazil.
Yeah.
There's a joke here that you know, the Argentines brag about having the Pope who's Argentine, and then the Brazilians say, yes, but God is Brazilian. So always, yeah. There's always a rivalry.
Oh, great.
That is great. Can I ask you about
funny?
Oh, can I ask you about COVID? I have an Argentine client, and he's been telling me that they've got the vaccine. He has access to the vaccine from Russia, Sputnik V. How's all that going for you? Is Sputnik the only vaccine available for you? Are you able to get it?
Yeah, the Russian and the Chinese vaccine are here. It's not available to me. It's really only available to teachers and healthcare workers and a few old people, but even the old people are really, or the senior citizens really don't, like, there's not a lot of doses here yet. Argentina's been in prevention mode, basically, because that's their best shot. So last year, when like mid-March, we went into lockdown mode, very strict, like you couldn't go out of your house for 2 weeks. And then the mask mandate came out, and that's been like going on since last year. So you have to wear a mask. For a long time, you could only go like a little bit outside of your house, like 250 meters. There's no like running or anything. It's been pretty chill, like, well, restaurants and bars and everything opened, and internal tourism opened back up in around September. Briefly, they opened the borders to Chile over the holidays, because a lot of there is a lot of mixing between Chile and Argentina, especially for work and family. And so basically just so that, you know, people could come and be with their family during the holidays, and then basically they close the borders again mid-January. Now there's talk of, so we have been on curfew 12:30 p.m. to 5 a.m. For about a week now. And there's talk that on Friday, there's going to be another big lockdown. So like no one's allowed out, everything closed down except for essential workers. We'll see, because we're pretty much at capacity, at least here in Mendoza, we're pretty much at capacity for the hospitals.
Hospital-wise.
Yeah. And we are going into winter, like it's fall here. So it's like right around, like everyone's getting sick again, everyone's got allergies.
Yeah.
Like they did have kids go back to school, but only like 1 week out of 2. So it's kind of weird. For a long time too, you could only go out if it was your number. So based on your ID number. Luckily, my Argentine ID is a different number than my passport. So I would, depending on the day, like I would use both IDs, but gaming the system.
Yeah. That's so good.
Weren't allowed to go shopping or even like really be out of the house if it wasn't your day.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, we'll see. Luckily, I mean, Argentina is like the land of crises. So, you know, a pandemic was like another Tuesday, you know, it's like, okay, like as far as, you know, like things getting out of hand, there was never any shortages of toilet paper or alcohol. There was about 1 week of shortages in cigarettes, which I'm not a smoker, but everyone else is. And so, yeah, it was like, in this stressful time, just give people their vices. Yeah, but no, it's been pretty okay. Besides just the borders being closed, only thing that's a little bit, but.
If you came back to the US at this point, would you be able to go back to Argentina?
So I'm about to get my permanent residency I'm going back to immigrations at the end of the month, so in a couple of weeks now. And I'm still unclear if they're giving it to me now or if I have to wait until June to get my permanent residency. So I'm like right at that cusp. And as soon as I have it, then I think I'll be able to.
Then no issue. Yeah.
Yeah. Because Argentine expats basically have been coming back to the country. So I'm just waiting to get my papers in order, and then I'll go back to the US to get vaccinated probably. Yeah. And to see my family because it's been so long.
For sure. How long has it been?
August 2019. So it's coming up on 2 years since I've been back. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And give us a rundown on your siblings again.
So Sam, who follows me, he graduated from the University of Minnesota in kinesiology, and he's now working at a company where he makes prosthetics. He just started in January. Before he was a personal trainer at the sweatshop.
Did he do Rotary?
He did. He was in France too.
Oh, cool.
Aiden, who's 24, he went to Zimbabwe, I think 4 years ago now.
Wow.
And he is in Montana studying biotechnology, and he'll be graduating this May. Oh, fingers crossed.
Yeah.
He gets credit in. There's always like one.
There's that one credit. Right.
Yeah. So as long as he gets that settled. And then Owen, my youngest brother, he's graduating high school now, and actually he would normally be applying to Rotary, but because poor guy, he's had all of his travel plans basically canceled. And so actually what we thought is that we're gonna do like basically an informal cultural exchange, and he's gonna come to Argentina for a year.
Oh, wonderful. That is great. That's great.
Yeah. So that's the plan anyways. And yeah, parents are still working, and they're planning on coming in February of next year because they were going to be coming in April of last year, but that trip got canceled.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure.
So if anyone wants to piggyback on that trip and come at the same time as them, February 2022. Yeah.
Nice.
So yeah.
McKinzie, can you thank you so much. This has just been fascinating.
Been great.
Can you tell us a little bit about your life? I mean, is it where you had your year of school and just, like renting, buying, friends, kind of typical day?
Yeah. So luckily, because I'm working online, I have a pretty flexible schedule, which is great because Argentina, like I have a really great social life here because they are very social beings. Like everyone's a social butterfly. Like family is very important, friends are very important, and work is like tomorrow. And so, I do have a really good group of friends here, which is great. I moved to a house. I'm renting a house here. I moved in November. It's a really big house, so there's definitely room for people to come and visit. It's a 3-bedroom house. I've got a little pool. The garden that you guys saw, now it's nighttime, but I do have a little garden. And honestly, like it's, this house is, I've got a balcony. It's like really great and huge. And rent is like less than $300 a month, you know?
Wow.
Yeah, like I can maintain my lifestyle, which I go out a fair amount just because, again, like if I cook for myself, most of my ingredients are usually like, I don't know, I love foreign recipes. So I'm always trying to make stuff back home and it's always really expensive because they're always like really specific ingredients. But so I do like to go, there's a pretty good restaurant scene here. And of course the wineries. There's a lot of hiking as well because we're so close to the mountains. Like in half an hour you can be outside of the city, even less than that really. So there's a lot of outdoors activities. I've got some friends that are from like Mendoza region, but south of here. So we'll go and like visit their family and hang out there. I like to ride my bike. I don't have a car. That would be like probably the next step. If my brother does come and stay with me, I think it'd be nice to have a car just for mobility reasons, but that'll be later on. I do have my Argentine driver's license, which, you know, was actually more difficult to pass than I was expecting. Because again, like what happens on the road is not what happens in the test, but I think there's a really good quality of life here. Especially if you make foreign currency, like that's the key. I did for 1 year when I got here, I lived on only my Argentine budget, or only my Argentine salary, sorry. And with inflation, it's really hard. It's really like, people are always, you know, it's really interesting to live in a country with such high inflation because I think it's really hard to imagine if, like living in the United States where there's hardly any inflation, it's difficult. It's really hard. Like people, every month you have to make a new sacrifice basically. And so that's what I decided. I was like, okay, this is great, but if I want to live here, like, and I want to be able to see my family at least once a year, like this does not cut it, you know? So, so actually now I'm learning to be a cryptocurrency trader, which is kind of like the transition that I'm going into this year. Crypto, I don't know if does anyone use cryptocurrency or is involved? Yeah, a little bit. It's interesting because it's been around for a while now, but I think it has a huge future, and I also think it has a huge future, especially for countries with high inflation, where basically if you have to choose between you know, the risk of just like having your currency or the risk of like, well, let me try this, you know, this new technology. I think it makes a lot of sense. And so far, like I'm taking like very baby steps because even though I like risks, I'm still like, it's money, you know, so, but it's going well. Yeah. So.
Oh, McKinzie, I want to thank you so much for speaking to us. This was such an interesting and really delightful conversation. The sun's been going down where you are. I mean, I could see your rock wall behind you. Now I can't see it anymore. What time is it? What time is it there?
It's 7:30, but you know, it's getting dark so quick now. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And with winter coming for sure. So thank you so much, McKinzie. I'm going to share my screen. At every meeting, we end reciting the 4-way test. I don't know if you remember the 4-way test.
I mean, I'm sure as soon as I see it, it'll jog my memory.
Well, here it is.
I like it.
So you guys unmute yourselves and we will recite this. So of the things we think, say, and do, is it the
truth?
True.
Is it fair to all concerned?
Will it
build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned?
Thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone, for being a part of this meeting. I sure enjoyed it.
Thanks
very much.
And thank you for letting me speak.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mackenzie, so much.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank you.
you. How do your dad?
Coming to visit.